this morning I woke up and I said, hey Siri, make up a joke about artificial intelligence. And it thought for a minute, and then it said, knock, knock. And I said, who's there? And it said, AI. And I said, AI who? And it said, I am coming for your job. And I was like, that's not funny, I'm not laughing. And it said, maybe that's because you're not smart enough.
Capitalism didn't just distort the economy. It reshaped culture, politics, and even how people think. Part 2 of Why Capitalism Fails looks at how extreme inequality fuels culture wars, how the culture industry channels anger away from power, how woke corporate politics function as both shield and weapon, and how AI is accelerating a job crisis that capitalism is structurally unable to handle. If part 1 focused on cost of living pressure, monopolies, and homelessness, this part explains the psychological and cultural machinery that keeps the system intact. Rising inequality doesn't just create economic stress, it fractures society. As wealth concentrates at the top, resentment builds below. But instead of producing unified pressure against those hoarding resources, that resentment is redirected into culture wars. Research on relative deprivation shows that people who feel economically cheated are more likely to lash out. But the target is often symbolic enemies, rather than structural ones. That's how class anger gets transformed into endless red team versus blue team battles. Issues like speech, identity, statures, and moral signalling dominate public discourse, while the people who actually control capital remain untouched. The result is predictable. The poor blame each other. The middle class fights over culture. Billionaires quietly consolidate more power. Solidarity collapses. Political energy dissipates. Inequality becomes permanent. This redirection isn't accidental. It's built into capitalism's cultural apparatus. Decades ago, Adorno and Horkheimer described the cultural industry. Mass-produced entertainment designed not to challenge the system, but to standardize thinking and create artificial desires. That logic has only intensified. Today's cultural industry recycles safe, formulaic movies and franchises, monetizes trauma and rebellion without threatening ownership, sells identity and representation, while avoiding systematic critique. Hollywood focuses on reboots and superhero franchises. Music celebrates wealth, pain, or personal struggle without confronting class. Advertising lectures consumers about morality while relying on sweatshop labour. Games offer surface-level progressive narratives while maintaining exploitive monetization systems. It all looks rebellious, but it never challenges who owns that. As inequality worsens, corporations increasingly adopt identity-based messaging, not to redistribute power, but to protect markets. DEI initiatives, rainbow branding, and moral posturing function as insulation. They help companies avoid boycotts, appeal to global audiences, and shift conflict away from labour ownership, and profits. But this also creates a new enforcement mechanism. Deviating from approved narratives can trigger mob backlash, not from the state, but from online crowds and algorithmic suppression. Examples illustrate the pattern. Jerry Seinfeld's 2024 Duke commencement speech criticized political correctness and self-censorship in comedy. Pro-Palestinian protesters walked out, not over jokes, but over his political views. The message to creatives was clear: tread carefully. Gaming. Hogwarts Legacy faced intense boycotts over J.K. Rowling's views. Streamers were harassed, developers pressured, yet the game sold over 22 million copies and topped charts. The boycott failed, but the chilling effect remained. History repeats. The Sex Pistols' God Save the Queen was suppressed through chart manipulation and broadcast bans in the 1970s. Today, suppression happens through platforms, algorithms, and social pressure instead of state censors. The outcome is controlled chaos. Cultural conflict thrives, but real threats to capital don't. Extreme inequality also rewires empathy. Studies using brain imaging shows that when people view homeless individuals, the brain regions associated with social recognition often fail to activate. Disgust responses increase instead. Structural victims become invisible, while symbolic issues trigger outrage. This explains why society tolerates tent cities, but explodes over cultural missteps. Selective empathy is not accidental, it's conditioned. The culture industry trains people to care about market-safe causes, while ignoring systematic harm. AI accelerates everything capitalism already does badly. Firms deploy automation primarily to cut labour costs. Large portions of retail, transport, logistics, and even white-collar work are at risk. Millions of jobs are exposed, while the response remains the same: upskill or be left behind. Capitalism treats displacement as an externality. Profit is protected, workers absorb the damage. But technology doesn't have to function this way. Automation could reduce working hours, guarantee basic needs, and eliminate meaningless labour, if its benefits weren't privately captured. That's the core conflict. Who controls the machines? This is why alternatives are gaining attention, not out of nostalgia, but necessity. Market liberalization in former Soviet states devastated industries and communities. Financial crises repeatedly bail out banks, while workers suffer. Housing has become a speculative asset instead of shelter. Meanwhile, hybrid models like China's state capitalist system demonstrate that planning can scale infrastructure and reduce poverty, even with serious flaws. The lesson isn't imitation, but recognition. Markets alone don't guarantee dignity. Past communist experiments failed due to authoritarianism and technological limits. But modern automation, logistics, and productive capacity change the equation. Abundance is technically possible. Scarcity is increasingly artificial. Capitalism adapts by cutting costs. not caring for people. It responds to climate with green branding, to inequality with culture wars, and to AI with layoffs. It doesn't evolve toward dignity because profit has no consciousness. That's why frustration is rising among renters, workers, creators, and younger generations facing fewer opportunities than their parents. Not because ideology shifted, but because survival pressures did. This isn't a rant, it's an argument grounded in economics, psychology, culture, and technology. Inequality isn't a glitch. It's the system's operating code. Culture wars keep people divided. AI exposes capitalism's limits. And unless ownership and control change, the instability only accelerates. The question isn't whether the system is sustainable. It isn't. The question is what replaces it, and who gets to decide.